Aaron Glenn and Dan Campbell have been preaching this message from day one that, like, hey, we're going to craft an offense or a defense that is catered around what our players do well and what they do best. And that has led me to believe like maybe we do see them run a little more zone because that's a little bit more comfortable, like in the wheelhouse of an Emmanuel Mosley. It's a little more in the wheelhouse of a Cam Sutton, and not so much of them playing a whole lot of man. And I think if the secondary can get into again a scheme and a mindset that gets them all on the same page, then the defense is able to kind of work a little more effortlessly and just kind of flow, and everybody kind of know where everyone is supposed to be, and there's not a whole lot of guessing and miscommunication, which also seemed to be an issue at times last year for the secondaries, that the guys just weren't communicating or guys weren't on the same page. Hopefully you eliminate a lot of that by having more veteran leadership and guys who are better at communicating. Again, it's something that we've been hearing coming out of OTA so far is a lot of guys in that back end communicating, talking, discussing, and calling out motion and calling out different things that they're seeing. So hopefully that keeps everybody in lock and step. So the secondary is a group that I expect them to drastically improve. Again, last year they gave up the second most yards per attempt in passing, third in total yards given up again in passing. They played cover zero more than anyone else in the league. And again, that's great if your team can do it. If your corners can be sticky and they can, lock up receivers on the outside, then great. But when they can't and you're constantly getting beat like they did in the Miami game, or even when you look at the Seattle game, where it was just like, yo, DK Metcalf is too big for you to be lining up one on one. You need to do something different. Um, I'm really looking for the secondary to make a drastic improvement, and as well, Aaron Glenn making an adjustment and being able to not be so stubborn with a style of play that he likes, and actually doing what he says he would do, which is cater your defense to what your players do well. And if that means playing more zone, play more zone. If that means being a little more multiple, which it seems like they want to do with this defense. I mean, again, they have so many guys on this defense, not just in the secondary, but as the defense as a whole that can play so many different positions, then utilize that versatility so to not be so predictable on the defensive end. Um, so that's kind of how I feel about the secondaries. That like I do think that they'll set the tone. I do think they'll be the unit that leads the charge for this defense going forward. But at the same time, I do think they're going to need to make some schematic changes in order to be more effective. Again, a team that played cover zero and a lot of man to man more than anyone. And we saw them struggle with it for a good portion of the first half of the season. And it wasn't until after that Miami game that they started to kind of switch things up and play a little more zone and kind of not just play more zone, but just again kind of alter that defense altogether. So I think if you can go into the year with a better understanding of what your team does well and not what you want them to do well, the secondary can perform a lot better. The next group, though, that I do think will actually be better, and the Lions have invested in it, and they've at least, made the commitment to having a better unit than they did the year before, is the linebackers. I actually think the linebackers will be better this year with the addition of Jack Campbell by bringing Alex Anzalone back. And while again, Alex Anzalone isn't the hero or the linebacker that I think a lot of us wish we had, he's been solid. He's been reliable for them. And I think the combination of him and Jack Campbell is actually going to see this defense be drastically different than they were a year ago, just from the simple fact that in Jack Campbell alone, like I talked about in a previous stream, I do think Jack just has a different gear and a different level of athleticism that the Lions just haven't had at the linebacker spot for a while now. And we've been hearing about how Derek Barnes has been drastically improving and doesn't seem quite like the same player he was the last couple years, and kind of making that year three jump. And if Malcolm Rodriguez can still kind of just be this depth piece and kind of this guy that can come in on run situations and kind of just be this feisty linebacker that you kind of have, well, now you have four solid linebackers that you can kind of rotate in and out at on any given down and distance or in any given matchup and feel good about your linebacking core. And it's been a long time since Lions fans have been able to say that. They're like, hey, we feel confident about our linebacker group. And it's mostly because you may have a linebacker that's good at blitzing, but he's not good at coverage, or you have a linebacker that's pretty decent in coverage, but he's not, the most physically imposing when it comes to the run game. Well, I think the Lions are getting there and they're getting something that's a little more balanced. And I think it starts with Jack Campbell with their 18th overall pick. And while we talked about in the last stream about like, hey, he may not be starting right now, and he's obviously going to have to earn that starting spot. I fully believe that Jack is going to do that once we get into training camp and once they throw on pads, because currently in OTAs and currently in minicamp, he's not able to play the position, I think, the way he's used to playing it, which is being fast and being physical and flying from sideline to sideline and not having to, again, focus so much on the mental part of the game right now. I think once we get into training camp and he's able to kind of let loose a little bit and get into these preseason matchups and to be able to get into um these combined practices with other teams, you're really going to kind of see how Jack stands out compared to everybody else. Um, and I think combining him with Alex will be the perfect match for him. While Jack can be this athletic freak that kind of is able to be anywhere and everywhere at all times, both in the run and the pass game, Alex can be that mentor to him to help him see things and make sure that he's looking and keeping an eye on the right things. Um, while they're kind of put together on the field at the same time. So that group in itself to me is going to be drastically better than it was a year ago, just for the simple fact that you'll have a Jack Campbell, and just from the simple fact that Derek Barnes seems to be, at least in early signs of OTAs and minicamp, to be making strides and getting better, you know, this early in the offseason. Now, the other group I think none of us are really worried about. There's still questions about as far as like what the rotation will be, but is the defensive end group, right? That edge group. And outside of, like, I have this group third on my list as I'm kind of going through it. And the thing that has me the most excited is that I think this group is going to provide the most versatility for this defense, and this their versatility and their ability to mix and match, and guys be able to go from edge to interior, from edge to maybe playing some linebacker or dropping in certain passing situations, is really going to unlock this defense and allow them to do a lot of interesting things, both against the run and against the pass. The Lions don't blitz a ton on early down situations, or at least they didn't in 2022. They obviously blitz a ton when it comes down to third and long situations. And they'll be going into the season with, at least for the first time in a while, like a healthy stable of guys currently, right? The way things are currently set up, a lot of these guys are healthy. Um, and we talked about it last week where I was talking about how James Houston and Josh Pascal are two guys that I expect to shine once training camp kind of rolls around. And those two guys weren't playing early on in the season. They weren't able to provide the level of versatility that the Lions will now have, where you'll literally be able to mix and match, and your NASCAR package will actually be very nasty because you have so many different bodies that you can rotate in and out, and you can literally put guys in different positions. You'll be able to do more, unique stunts and things of that nature because of the athleticism and, just again, like I said, the versatility of you having on those edge positions, whether it's an Aiden, whether it's a John Kaminsky, whether it's a Josh Pascal, whether it's a Romeo Aquara, a Julian Aquara. All of these guys can kind of rotate in and out and can line up in so many different places where it's really going to cause a lot of havoc for opposing offenses. And being able to do that up front, and then having this, having athletic linebackers behind them, and then having this, intense and high flying, secondary behind them that's uber competitive. This defense starts to kind of flow in a way where you're like, man, if all of these things can hit, if all of the schematic things can kind of line up, if they do the right things, game in and game out, matchup in, like with various matchups and things of that nature, there's a lot of optimism to be had for this defense in those regards. Um, I expect Aiden to take another step forward. I don't know how big that step will be. Getting 9.5 sacks as a rookie, we know about, his double team percentage. We know about, again, how he kind of had to evolve his game as the season went along. I expect him to get better. I just don't know how much better it'll be. Will it be another, will he get to double digit sacks? I would think so, right? You're half a sack away from getting 10. we'll probably talk about it in a future stream, but like it wouldn't surprise me if Aiden got, 12, 13 sacks because again, he's going to have more opportunities, I believe, just for the simple fact of having a more stingy secondary and be able to be put in more third and long situations, and then to be able to have so many guys that'll also be able to take pressure off of him because you'll have to contend with whoever's rushing on the other end. Whether that is again a Romeo Okwara, Charles Harris, Josh Pascal, James Houston, whatever the case may be, like there's going to be other guys that you have to contend with, and you can't just assume that like, well, we can just double team Aiden all game.